Hey guys, Ariel over here at Nyth. Today I want to talk about, now that I'm past my 3rd anniversary and into my 4th year of living in my tiny house, several people have asked me if I was back at day 1 knowing what I do now, what would I do differently, if anything? Is there anything I would change? So first of all, I'm really content with my house. I have it, it's done, it all works. Almost none of the things I'm going to mention are a big enough hassle to make me actually want to go through the hassle to change them. I realize that almost all of them would be changeable, but I just don't want to go to the work and take the time to do it. So I'm sure some people are going to give me helpful suggestions on how I could change all those things. But for the most part, I'm going to live with them the way they are because it does work. But on the other hand, there are a few things that if I was starting over from day 1, the first and biggest one I have already changed, so I'll show you what that is. But for the most part, I'm going to live with them the way they are. But if I was starting over, I would do these few things a little differently with my tiny house design. Now this list is like everything else. This is personal to me, what works for me, how my life works, and how I use my living space. And some or all of these things may not apply to you at all. But hopefully if you're thinking about a tiny house design and a plan and all that, it maybe gives you some ideas to think about for yourself and the way you do things and what works for you. So hopefully it's helpful for that. Let's go. So the very first thing I would do differently is I would put in a wood stove from day 1. I thought about it from day 1, but I decided that at the time that I thought it was going to take up too much space because you got the stove, you've got the clearances, and I didn't think that would be worth it. I thought propane heat would be handier. But with a nice tightly sealed house, partially with the cold climate, even though the air here is very dry, you get a huge temperature difference between the inside of your house and the outside. And if you cook and breathe and expire moisture off of your skin like human beings do, you're probably going to have a condensation problem. And I ended up with a pretty big one. So in hindsight, I would have put a wood stove in from day 1. I'm so glad I have it now. Went in my 2nd winter here, and that is the first thing I would change. For more info on this little stove in particular and all of its history, check out my playlist, Tiny Wood Stove and Firewood, which has a lot of info on that and putting it in and what it is and all that stuff. The next thing I would personally change, and this is somewhat a matter of personal preference for sure, is my open shelving in the kitchen. In the kitchen specifically, because I don't really have open shelving anywhere else. And I thought I would like the openness. I thought maybe it would make things feel a little more spacious, but just for me personally, again, other people might be very different. I know a lot of people really like it. Actually the first thing that I didn't like about it is just that it looks more cluttered to me. Just visually, when you look here, even though this is tidy and neat, there's all the different jars, there's all the different shapes, there's the different colors of things in the jars, and if it was instead just a white cabinet door that was closed, to me that would look more simple and tidy, and that's just my preference. And the other big thing is, now that I have a wood stove, one of those facts of life thing when you heat with wood is you're always going to get a little bits of dust and particles in the air, and over time they build up on open shelves, and I'll have to, get a pan down and actually rinse it out or dust it out because it gets some little particles in there. So again, if I could close the door on everything, that would reduce that greatly. So that's probably the second thing I would change. I would do basically the same thing, except to put a closed covered door on all of this stuff. In some of the spots I already kind of did, like putting a little curtain rod towel across there to close that up. But I would close all of those in and not have them as open shelves. I think the third thing I would do differently if I was starting over is I would go with window frames that were composite instead of real wood. Again, this is related to the moisture issues that can develop in small spaces, because that is certainly an issue. And if you've been following me from back on the start, even before I was doing YouTube videos when it was just a blog, you know that I did have a lot of condensation problems, and particularly around the windows because of the temperature difference. It might be -20 or something outside, and it'd be 70 inside. That's like, what is that, a 90-degree difference. That's very substantial. So I would get moisture condensing out on the windows to the point where it would drip down. It would soak into the window frames, and eventually they were staying wet enough in the winter that everything was wet like out to here, and then I was getting mold growing. So that has all been cleaned up. Don't worry about that. Between borax and bleach, I was able to kill the mold, thankfully, air everything out, and I've had no issues for quite a few years now. But just because of that, and because of the tendency to have moisture in either places where you have climates where you're going to have a big temperature differential from inside to outside, or where you're going to have humidity indoors, which is going to be most small spaces if you got a person doing anything in there, like breathing and living, it would just be a lot easier to maintain and clean up. If you did get condensation on the windows, you could wipe it up. It wouldn't be soaking into the frames and being, you know, making a potential place for mold and problems to grow. So if I was starting all over, I would definitely do not do wood frames. And the other thing is the little panes. They do help somewhat with visually, like from the exterior, making the whole house look proportionate with itself and not way off. But they're kind of annoying when you're inside and you're looking out, just because they divide up your field of vision all the time. So if I was starting over, I think I would actually do a few less windows, because I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14. I got 15 different windows in here. All of them with at least 4 panes. So when I go to window wash, for one, which is one of my least favorite cleaning chores, that is a ton of little individual panes and corners to clean. They're a real pain. And also, it just doesn't give you the best visual outside. And I've got beautiful scenery around here. But if I was doing it over, I'd probably condense several of mine into you know, on that wall, there's 2 separate windows. I'd probably get rid of the 2 windows and put one larger one with no dividers in it in the middle instead. And here I'd probably get rid of, you know, this one and the next one by the couch and put one larger one in between instead. That's, you know, obviously some of a personal preference thing, but for me, being in here for this long, I think that is what I would do, knowing what I know now about what I like. Then there's my storage stairs over here, which I like really well for a lot of things. They're really functional, I find. You can store quite a bit of whatever you're needing. I use it mostly for clothes, personally, but you can store quite a bit in these drawers, and I don't have any problem personally getting up and down out of the loft. However, since I've seen so many more tiny house designs since building mine, and I've been in other tiny houses and lived here for a while, I think if I was starting over, I would probably do a stairs a little more like one of these. You would still have a lot of storage. It would just be accessed from this side instead of in the steps. The stairs themselves would take up a little bit more room for sure, which would be a trade-off, but you would have all that room as storage anyway, so I could, you know, maybe shrink the pantry here and slide the whole stairs back, something like that. I could remodel that at this point, but it would be a lot of work, and so I probably am not going to. But if I had a little bit more of a traditional stair tread, and the other thing with that is I would definitely only go to like here with the actual stairs, because from there you could just sit down on the loft. You don't need the extra little steps in between. You can't walk on them standing up anyway because of the head height. But it would make it a little easier for when I do have guests. Like my aunt and uncle were out to visit me a few months ago, and they stayed in the loft while they were here, and I slept on the couch, which was fine, and they were okay with it. But when I have friends here who are a little less mobile, a little older, or like my sister-in-law was here and she was 8 months pregnant, and having a dog, Grizzly could actually get up the steps if they were a little wider. So there are definitely some trade-offs there where it would be maybe worth giving up the extra space and using that storage in place of some other storage, making space somewhere else, and having a little bit more walkable stair steps instead of a comfortable ladder. The next thing would be the sleeping loft. I really love my partial wall across here, which you probably saw the other side of when you watched my sleeping loft video. I like having the privacy, and I like the heat blocking from the downstairs, since I do heat with wood and I don't like sleeping super cold, super warm. But I would have, if I was starting over again, and I may still do something other than my temporary curtain here. Temporary, it's been there for the last 2 years. If I was starting over, I would build some kind of a little swinging door across this entryway spot, as well as have this actually, you know, closed off. Probably still leaves a little gap up here, so there is some air circulation back and forth and so on. But just have extended this out with, I don't know, a pocket door would probably be best there, because a swinging door would run into problems with swinging into things either way. But I would have done something like that from the start, knowing what I know now. Then there's my bookshelf. I really like these little shelves up here, and I've got one on that side of the house as well. They are excellent for storing books or plants or whatever else you might want. They do give you a lot of space, and they're up out of the way. I'm standing on a chair actually to reach this comfortably, and so that's great. The one thing I would have done differently, and this was my bad, because Tumbleweed did what I asked them. The depth here is correct, but you see how a lot of the books are hanging out over? That's actually because of the angle of the ceiling coming in there. This shelf lines up with the bottoms of the lofts on both ends, with the top of the loft. If it instead lined up with the bottom of the loft, it would be down like 3 inches lower, and then these books would be able to slide the entire way onto the shelf, because they wouldn't be running into the angle of the roof. So that was just a kind of careless planning thing on my part, and it works. They stay up there. It's not like they're going to fall off, but then they would go the whole way onto the shelf, and that would be a little nicer. So I would change that. Another thing I do differently here in the kitchen is the only real kitchen light is right up here above this window, and then there's one over the stove, which is nice, but because of all the stuff here, this corner can be a little dark. So in hindsight, I would have put another light like right here somewhere, which is obviously something I could still change. I've just never done it. I do have a couple little LED lights here, but they're not that bright, so they haven't really been that helpful. But on the theme of things I'd do differently, I'd have another more central, brighter light right here to help light up this end of the kitchen, because the whole rest of the house is pretty well lit. But if it's dark, which it's not right now, this little corner can be a little bit dim. I think the final thing I would change would be this little corner porch. And again, this may be, all my changes are specific to what works for me. If you were on the road a lot and traveling like a Tiny House Expedition or Tiny House Giant Journey or some of those places, you might not, this trade-off might very well not be worth it. I could see that. But because I'm in one spot and not moving every day, I think I would be fine with, I could have even put like a little separate, if I really wanted it, porch roof, you know, separate from the house out there. But if I was starting over, I would build this house out so the full corner here was part of the main house instead of a little porch outside. That probably would have meant I would have shifted the door over to like right here, and so then either the coat rack mudroom would go in that corner, or you would have room to put a couch the whole way across this end, which could be nice, and then you'd have this space for something else, or you could just make a bigger L-shaped couch. Anyway, it would just give you that much more room to work with inside, and having the little porch there for me is just not that valuable. So in hindsight, I would have pushed this corner out and made that all part of the inside. Now, like I said, this is my personal list. This is things that I would do differently if I was starting over, but probably not all of those things would apply to anybody else. So, but hopefully that's just some things to think about if you are still designing a tiny house or a small dwelling, small living space, so that, you know, if you're into your 4th year later, that you have a few less things you would do differently. Thanks for watching, folks! If you're interested in more info on my off-grid tiny house life, check out some of my other videos here. And if you like what you're seeing, click the little picture of my house to subscribe and then hit the little bell so YouTube actually notifies you every time there's a new video available. See y'all next time!